On the outskirts of Dayton, veteran David Hale thought he had bought nothing more than a broken garage to keep his family afloat. But when his faithful German shepherd Rex grew restless around a cracked section of the floor, David realized this wasn't chance, it was a sign. Beneath the concrete lay not just dust and shadows, but a secret sealed for decades, a hidden collection worth millions, a legacy of redemption left behind by a man long forgotten. What began as survival soon became a miracle that would change not only his life, but the fate of an entire town. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The morning air in Dayton was cold and damp, a faint drizzle clinging to the streets like the ghost of yesterday's storm. David Hale sat behind the wheel of his rusted pickup truck, fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his jawline tense beneath a shadow of stubble. At 45, David looked older than his years. A veteran of the U.S. Army who had served in both Iraq and Afghanistan, he carried in his posture the rigid memory of battlefields and in his eyes the quiet exhaustion of a man who had seen too much. His hair, once a proud dark brown, was now cut close and speckled with gray, and faint lines dug into the corners of his eyes and mouth, the kind carved by both grief and endurance. On the passenger seat, a 10-year-old boy shifted, tapping his sneakers together nervously. This was Ethan Hale, David's son, thin but wiry, his brown hair perpetually messy, his dark eyes wide with the restless curiosity of youth. He carried a small red backpack, frayed at the edges, decorated with stickers of cars and trucks. Despite the weariness on his face, Ethan's innocence had not yet been dimmed by the hardships he and his father endured. For all the uncertainty in their lives, his presence was a constant light for David, a reason to rise each morning even when grief pressed heavy on his chest. In the bed of the truck, sitting upright and alert, was Rex, their German shepherd. Rex was 6 years old with a coat of thick sable fur blending black and tan, ears pricked high, eyes sharp and amber-colored, trained once to follow commands from David during his Army days, but now serving a quieter role, guardian of this fragile household. His broad chest and disciplined posture spoke of a dog once accustomed to duty, though his watchful gaze now often turned toward Ethan with unmistakable loyalty. As the wipers squeaked across the cracked windshield, David's thoughts drifted back, as they often did, to Sarah. His late wife had been tall and slender, with auburn hair that shone brighter in the sun, and a laugh that could soften even his hardest days. Cancer had taken her 2 years earlier, robbing both father and son of warmth they had counted on like air. Since then, David had done what veterans do, survive. Yet surviving was not the same as living. His body carried invisible scars from roadside bombs and sleepless nights in faraway deserts, but the wound of losing Sarah was the deepest of all. Ethan turned to him suddenly, breaking the silence. "Dad, are we going to make the rent this time?" The boy's voice was soft, almost hesitant, but direct in a way only children could be. David swallowed, forcing his expression to remain calm. "Don't worry about that, buddy. That's my job, not yours." He tried to sound reassuring, but the truth pressed heavily. The rent was due in 5 days, and the work he had was sparse. Oil changes, brake jobs, odd repair calls that barely kept food on the table. His hands, once steady on a rifle, were now permanently stained with grease, yet the paychecks never stretched far enough. He drove toward the center of town, past sagging porches and shuttered storefronts, remnants of an economy that had dried up when the factories closed. Dayton was not what it once had been. The skeletons of old auto plants loomed like monuments to forgotten prosperity, their broken windows staring down at the weary residents who scraped by. In the distance, neon flickered outside Thompson's Gas and Feed, a local gathering place for mechanics, truckers, and anyone trying to barter news for work. David pulled into the lot, killing the engine after its customary shudder. Inside, the smell of oil, tobacco, and burnt coffee filled the air. The walls were plastered with flyers, handwritten notes, and local advertisements. David scanned them absent-mindedly as Ethan played with a toy truck in the corner, and Rex lay obediently at his feet. One flyer caught David's eye. The paper was yellowed and creased, taped awkwardly to the corkboard. Garage for sale. $5,000 or best offer. Needs work. Serious inquiries only. Address, Milner Road. There was no photo, only a phone number scrawled in fading ink. For a long moment, David stared at it. A garage. A place of his own. Somewhere he could fix cars without worrying about rent on another man's property. The thought stirred something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. But reality followed swiftly. $5,000 might as well have been $50,000. His savings were almost gone, drained by medical bills, funeral costs, and months of trying to keep Ethan's world intact. Yet, the idea planted itself in his mind, stubborn as a weed. He pulled the flyer from the board, folded it, and slid it into his jacket pocket. Later that night, back in their rented duplex, David stood by the window while Ethan finished his homework at the kitchen table. The house was drafty, patched together with duct tape and goodwill, its single bulb buzzing overhead. Ethan chewed the end of his pencil, his face intent as he scrawled spelling words onto lined paper. David watched him, his chest tightening with both pride and guilt. This boy deserved better. Better than frozen dinners, better than secondhand shoes, better than a father who often stared too long at the shadows of the past. Rex padded over and sat at David's feet, nudging his leg gently as if sensing his turmoil. David reached down, scratching behind the dog's ear. "What do you think, old boy? A garage of our own. Crazy, huh?" Rex's ears twitched, and his steady gaze seemed to answer with the kind of faith only a dog could hold. David lit a cigarette, though he had promised Sarah long ago he would quit. Smoke curled upward, blurring the edges of the room. The flyer sat on the counter, a silent invitation, daring him to believe in something again. He thought of Sarah's last words, whispered in the sterile glow of a hospital room. "Don't stop living, Dave." For him. He knew she had meant Ethan. He also knew he had been doing the opposite ever since. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft against the roof, steady as a heartbeat. David picked up the flyer, his thumb brushing the worn paper. He whispered into the quiet room, "Maybe this is it." Ethan looked up from his notebook. "What's it, Dad?" David forced a smile. "Just an idea. Go on, finish up. Big day tomorrow." As Ethan returned to his work, David's eyes lingered on the flyer once more, the weight of possibility pressing as heavy as any rucksack he had carried in war. He did not know if this garage on Milner Road was salvation or another burden waiting to crush him, but he felt something he hadn't in a long time. He felt the stirrings of a fight worth taking. The rain had stopped by the time David pulled his old pickup onto Milner Road, but the clouds hung low and gray as if they carried secrets of their own. The street was lined with sagging houses and empty lots, ghosts of a once bustling industrial district now left behind by time. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, his red backpack on his lap, wide-eyed and restless. Rex shifted in the back, the German shepherd's head lifting with each sound outside, ears pricked, his body taut with the tension of new territory. When they reached the end of the block, the garage came into view. It stood alone on a corner lot, its siding warped and sun-bleached, windows cracked, weeds curling through the gravel drive. Above the rusted bay doors hung a sign so faded it looked like smoke. Whitmore Auto, Est 1960. The letters tilted unevenly and the paint peeled away like dead bark. David parked the truck slowly, staring at the structure. It was worse than he had expected, a skeleton of a shop barely standing. Yet, beneath the ruin, he felt something stir, the same stubborn pull that had made him take the flyer in the first place. "Dad, are we really gonna go inside?" Ethan asked, his voice thin. The boy tugged at the strap of his backpack, his sneakers scuffing nervously against the seat. David gave a small nod. "Yeah, buddy, we came this far." He glanced at Rex in the rear view. The dog's amber eyes locked forward, ears rigid. David knew Rex well enough to sense when the animal was on edge. It wasn't fear exactly, but a wariness born of instinct. A man was waiting near the side door, leaning against a wooden cane that seemed too short for his frame. He was thin, almost brittle, his back slightly stooped with a mop of wiry gray hair under a weathered cap. His face was lined deep, not only by age but by years of disappointment, and his mouth was set in a grim curve that spoke of habits long unbroken. This was Carl Donovan, the one who had answered David's call about the garage. At 68, Carl looked like someone who had spent his life doing hard work for little reward, his skin roughened like leather, and his eyes a faded blue that still held an edge of suspicion. "You Hale?" Carl's voice rasped, rough as gravel. "That's me," David replied, extending a hand. Carl eyed it for a moment, then gave a half-hearted shake. His grip was weak, not out of frailty but out of a man who no longer cared to make impressions. "Place is yours if you want it," Carl said, shifting his weight on the cane. "But I'll tell you now, others tried. Didn't last long. Folks say there's things in here better left alone." David felt Ethan shrink a little beside him. The boy clutched his backpack tighter, but David only squared his shoulders. "I don't believe in ghost stories," he said firmly. Carl gave a crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not ghosts, just bad luck. You'll see." He fumbled with a padlock on the rusted bay doors, producing a ring of keys. His hands trembled faintly, not from age alone, but from years of cigarettes that left his fingernails yellowed. With a sharp twist, the lock snapped open and the doors groaned as they rolled halfway up, shrieking against metal tracks. The air that drifted out was thick with dust and old oil. David stepped inside first, boots crunching broken glass scattered on the floor. The space stretched larger than expected, shadows lingering in corners where light could not reach. Workbenches sagged under rusted tools, shelves leaned sideways with forgotten cans of grease, and an old lift stood in the center like a broken monument. Ethan crept in behind him, eyes wide, while Rex sniffed the air, nose twitching, muscles taut as a bowstring. "This was Whitmore's place," Carl said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Old man ran it till he died. Never let no one pass that back wall there." He gestured with his cane toward a cracked cinder block wall at the rear. "Said it was storage. Maybe he had his reasons. I didn't ask. Just kept the deed safe after." David's eyes traced the wall, noting how it seemed strangely smoother than the rest, almost newer. He filed it away silently. "You want it. it's 5,000, Carl said simply. Cash, I don't haggle, I don't want to. I'm tired of being tied to this place. His voice grew quieter. Whitmore was a proud man, but pride don't pay bills. Same as soldiers. You know that, don't you? The words landed heavier than Carl probably intended. David looked at him sharply. Yeah, I know. For a moment, the two men held each other's gaze. Carl's eyes softened faintly, as if recognizing something familiar in David, the same stubbornness of a man who had lost too much and was still standing because he had nothing else to do. Ethan tugged David's sleeve. Dad, it smells bad in here. David smiled faintly, kneeling so he was level with his son. That's just old oil and dust, buddy. Nothing we can't fix with elbow grease. Ethan nodded, though his small face was pinched with unease. Rex padded over, his claws tapping lightly against the concrete. He sniffed near the back wall again, head cocked, ears forward. David watched him, something tightening in his chest. Dogs often sensed things people couldn't. But he said nothing. Carl tossed the keys toward David, who caught them mid-air. Your problem now. Don't say I didn't warn you. The old man turned, limping toward a rusted sedan parked across the street. His figure looked even smaller as he drove away, swallowed by the haze of the neighborhood. David stood in the center of the garage, turning slowly in a circle. To anyone else, it was a ruin. To him, it was possibility. He could see workbenches cleaned, lifts repaired, maybe a sign with his own name one day. A place not rented, but owned. It was dangerous. His savings were nearly gone, but something inside him refused to let go of the chance. Dad? Ethan's voice pulled him back. The boy's eyes searched his, worried and hopeful all at once. David closed his hand around the keys. Yeah, he said softly, we'll take it. And with that, he handed over what remained of their savings. It wasn't just a purchase, it was a gamble, a decision born from desperation, but also from a quiet defiance. For the first time in years, David felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to fight for something. The first week in the garage was nothing but dust, sweat, and the creak of rusted metal giving way beneath David's steady persistence. He rose each morning with Ethan and drove to Milner Road, determined to make the ruin into something functional. The building still groaned under years of neglect. Spiderwebs draped the rafters, and the scent of oil clung to the air like a memory that refused to fade. David scrubbed, hammered, and tossed out piles of forgotten junk while Ethan tried to help, though the boy mostly ended up playing with broken bolts and bits of wire, his imagination turning them into miniature cities on the dusty floor. Rex, ever alert, moved constantly around the shop, his nose twitching, ears pricked as if guarding against invisible intruders. Among the debris, David uncovered relics of another era. A dented Coca-Cola cooler with paint flaking off, yellowed newspapers rolled into corners, and old calendars frozen in time around 1967, each page filled with images of muscle cars and pinup models. There were toolboxes heavy with wrenches, still bearing faint engravings of the name Whitmore. To David, each object felt like a ghost whispering of the man who had once run this place with pride. He tried to picture Whitmore, a mechanic with grease under his nails, perhaps stubborn like himself, a man who had kept his secret sealed behind that mysterious back wall Carl had pointed to. The thought lingered. On the third night, long after Ethan had been tucked into bed on a cot David set up in the corner office, David returned with Rex to continue clearing the floor. The boy had fallen asleep still wearing his hoodie, curled beneath a blanket, his pencil resting beside a half-finished drawing of cars and trucks. David paused to look at him, a soft ache tightening in his chest. Sarah's absence was sharpest in these quiet moments when he saw their son trying to hold on to small comforts. He whispered, "I'll get this right, kiddo," before closing the office door gently. The main bay echoed as David worked alone, his boots leaving faint tracks in the layer of dust. Rex stayed near, the dog's claws clicking faintly on the concrete. But tonight, Rex was restless, circling a particular section of floor near the back wall. His nose pressed low, his tail stiff, a low growl rising from his throat whenever he stopped. David frowned, crouching beside him. The floor here looked no different from the rest. Gray concrete, cracked with age. But as he ran his palm over the surface, his fingers caught on something unusual. Under the beam of his flashlight, he saw it clearly. A faint seam, nearly invisible, cutting a crooked line across the slab. He tapped it with the handle of a wrench. The hollow sound that came back made his pulse quicken. He straightened slowly, breath caught in his chest. For a long moment he simply stood there, the garage around him silent except for the faint rattle of wind through broken panes. Then he called softly, "Ethan, come here." A minute later, the boy appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes, hair sticking up in messy tufts. Ethan's small frame looked even smaller in the oversized hoodie, his backpack still strapped to one shoulder as if he had refused to part with it even in sleep. His eyes grew wide when he saw his father kneeling by the floor with Rex snarling softly at the seam. "What is it, Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Something hidden," David murmured. "Help me move this junk aside." Together they cleared broken shelves and old oil cans away, revealing a larger outline in the concrete. David reached for a crowbar, wedging it into the crack. With a grunt, he pried, the strain making his scarred forearms flex against the flannel sleeves. The seam widened, dust spitting upward. Rex barked sharply, his entire body tense. Then, with a grinding noise, a square slab lifted slightly, revealing a rusted metal hatch embedded into the floor. It bore a circular keyhole, its edges corroded with age. David stared at it, heart pounding. He reached instinctively into his jacket pocket and pulled out the ring of keys Carl had given him. The largest, an iron key mottled with rust, looked older than the garage itself. "Dad, don't," Ethan whispered, clutching his sleeve. The boy's face was pale, his dark eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. "What if it's bad?" David looked at him, then at Rex, who stood rigid, fur bristling, a low growl still vibrating in his chest. He felt a rush of doubt, the weight of responsibility heavy. But another voice rose within him, the voice that had carried him through war zones, that whispered survival came not from fear, but from resolve. He placed the key into the lock. It slid in as if it had been waiting. With a click that echoed too loudly in the silence, the hatch shuddered, then swung inward. A rush of damp air surged up, smelling of mold, rust, and metal long forgotten. David lifted the hatch fully, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The walls were made of stone, slick with condensation, steps disappearing into black. Rex barked once, a sound sharp and urgent. Ethan clutched his backpack tighter, eyes wide with terror. "Dad, please don't go down there," he pleaded. His voice cracked, the fear of a child laid bare. David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. His own fear was real, heavy as armor, but he couldn't show it. "We don't run from what's in front of us," he said gently, though the words were more for himself than for Ethan. We'll just take a look. Together. He raised the flashlight, the beam cutting into the gloom. The light fell on damp stone, on the curve of descending steps, on shadows that seemed to breathe. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, yet his grip tightened on the flashlight. With Rex at his side and Ethan reluctantly behind him, David set one boot onto the first step. The cold stone met his soul like ice. He descended slowly, the air growing thicker, sharper with every step downward. The darkness seemed to swallow the sound of their breathing until only the echo of boots and claws remained. David tried to steady his thoughts, but fragments of memory came unbidden. Patrols through ruined villages, doors kicked open to reveal unknown dangers, Sarah's voice urging him to hold on to courage when he had none left. He knew this was different, yet the sensation was hauntingly familiar. Halfway down, Ethan whimpered, and David reached back, squeezing his hand. "Just stay close," he whispered. Rex growled again, the sound reverberating off the damp walls. The stairs seemed endless, but at last the beam of light caught on something below, an opening into a cavernous space that stretched beyond sight. David halted, staring into the void that waited. The garage above had been filled with dust and ruin, but what lay below promised something far stranger, something deliberately hidden. For a long breath, he stood frozen on the final step, Ethan trembling at his back, Rex braced at his side, and he realized he had crossed a threshold not just of stone, but of fate. The stone steps ended in a cavernous chamber, the air heavy with dampness and a metallic tang that clung to the tongue. David raised the flashlight higher, its thin beam slicing through the dark, and what it revealed made him pause mid-step. The space was vast, larger than any basement he had ever seen, with walls of rough stone and a ceiling braced by steel beams. Rows upon rows of enormous shapes stretched into the shadows, each cloaked beneath tarps that swayed faintly as if breathing. Ethan clung to his father's sleeve, his eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief, while Rex stood ahead of them, ears stiff, body angled forward as though caught between warning and wonder. David's breath came shallow, his soldier's instincts telling him to retreat, yet his mechanic's heart urged him to uncover what lay hidden. He moved slowly, boots echoing in the silence until he reached the nearest shrouded form. With one hand trembling, he caught the edge of the canvas and pulled. Dust exploded into the air, making Ethan cough, and as the tarp fell away, the beam of the flashlight caught crimson curves and polished chrome. It was a car. A Mustang Fastback 1967, its cherry-red body gleaming as though it had been painted yesterday, its lines sleek and muscular, every detail intact. David's chest tightened. He ran a hand gently along the fender, the cold steel smooth under his calloused fingers. This was not junk. This was perfection, preserved against time. "Dad," Ethan whispered, awe replacing fear. "It's beautiful." David swallowed hard. He pulled another tarp free. This time a Ferrari shimmered in the dim light, red as fire, its stallion emblem proud and untarnished. Then another tarp revealed a Porsche 356, its rounded body elegant and silver gray, followed by a Shelby Cobra that seemed to hum with potential speed even at rest. Each reveal struck David like a blow, overwhelming and surreal. His flashlight beam swept down the row. Bugatti, Aston Martin, Jaguar, each one pristine. He turned in a slow circle, the reality sinking in. He was standing in a vault of treasure, a museum of machines worth not just thousands, not even millions, but tens of millions. His throat was dry, his heart pounding with a rhythm that belonged more to battle than discovery. "What in God's name is this place?" he murmured. Rex barked once, sharp and echoing, as though to remind them they were not just dreamers, but intruders. David's beam of light fell upon a desk at the far end of the chamber. It was heavy oak, scarred and old, a workman's desk rather than a collector's. Papers lay scattered, and atop them rested a leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked with age. David approached, each step measured, his son and dog close behind. He opened the book with care. Inside, page after page was filled with precise handwriting, each entry a record of a car, make, model, year, restoration notes, hours worked, parts used, and finally, value. The script grew shakier toward the end, lines tilting as if written by an unsteady hand. At the last page, one line stood out in faded ink. Collection complete. 34 vehicles. Estimated total value $78,300. Secure until ready. This collection is my redemption. If you find it, protect it. David's vision blurred for a moment. He closed his eyes, gripping the edges of the desk. Bernard Whitmore. The name was familiar from the sign outside, but until this moment the man had been nothing more than a forgotten mechanic. Now he was revealed as someone who had spent a lifetime gathering and preserving this collection. But why? Why hide it, entombing fortune beneath crumbling concrete? Ethan tugged at his sleeve again, his young face serious. "Dad, are we rich now?" His voice trembled between hope and confusion. David stared down at the boy, his own face shadowed by the weight of the question. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. Rich was not the word that came to mind. Overwhelmed, yes. Burdened, absolutely. He thought of Sarah, her smile, her words before she died. "Don't stop living, Dave. For him." Would she see this as salvation or temptation? He sat heavily in the wooden chair behind the desk, running his hand across the ledger as if to ground himself. His mind churned with conflicting thoughts. He could sell one car, just one, and pay off debts, move Ethan into a better home, finally breathe again. But the ledger's words haunted him. Protect it. He could almost feel Whitmore's ghost demanding guardianship of something larger than money. Rex nudged his knee, whining softly as if sensing his turmoil. The dog's amber eyes met his, steady and patient, a grounding presence. Ethan leaned against his arm, trusting completely, waiting for his father to decide what this meant for their future. David inhaled sharply, the air damp and bitter. He remembered patrol nights overseas, when decisions had to be made in the dark, with no clarity, only gut instinct. This was no battlefield, yet the weight of choice felt no less crushing. He stood again, walking down the rows once more. The cars gleamed under his flashlight, machines crafted by human genius, silent testimonies to skill and devotion. They were not merely objects, they were stories, fragments of history entrusted to him. Bernard Whitmore had called it redemption. Could David, broken soldier turned struggling mechanic, find his own redemption in them too? His hands shook as he closed the ledger and placed it carefully back on the desk. Ethan's voice cut the silence, small but clear. "What do we do now, Dad?" David looked at him, then at Rex, then back to the gleaming cars. His answer came slowly, heavy with uncertainty but laced with resolve. "We protect it, son. For now, we protect it." And as he said the words, the truth settled deep in his bones. He did not yet know how or what it would demand of him, but the choice was already made. The darkness of the garage no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a test. The nights after the discovery stretched long and sleepless. David lay on the worn couch in their duplex, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside and the soft breathing of his son in the next room. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw rows of gleaming cars under canvas sheets, the polished Mustang, the fiery Ferrari, the silver Porsche. The image was dazzling, but also suffocating, pressing down on him like a weight too heavy to bear. He could not shake the words in Whitmore's ledger. "This collection is my redemption. If you find it, protect it." They echoed through his thoughts with the persistence of gunfire in memory, impossible to silence. Money was gone. His last savings had been spent on the garage. Rent was past due, groceries were dwindling, and the jobs coming in were not enough. One car, just one, could solve everything. Selling a single Ferrari could pay off debts, buy a real home, ensure Ethan a better life. Yet each time he let the thought form fully, guilt tore at him. It felt like betrayal, not just of Whitmore, but of something larger, something sacred that had been entrusted to him. In the kitchen, Ethan sat at the table one afternoon, his crayons scattered across the surface. The boy had drawn a crude outline of the garage, complete with bay doors and a bright sign scrawled in shaky letters, "Car Museum." Beside it, he had sketched Rex standing proudly like a statue, tongue lolling, tail wagging, a smiley face above his head. "Dad, see?" Ethan said, grinning, his teeth slightly crooked. "We could show everyone. Rex can be the mascot." David looked down at the drawing, his heart aching. The child's innocence struck him harder than any battlefield wound. Ethan didn't see money, debt, or risk. He saw possibility, pride, something to share with others. For a moment, David envied that simplicity. He ruffled his son's hair, whispering, "It's a good dream, kiddo." He didn't add how impossible it felt. That night, when the house grew still, David caught sight of Rex lying near the door to the garage, his body curled but his eyes open, staring at the dark. The German shepherd, now 6 years old, seemed to understand in ways words could not. His fur gleamed in the faint lamplight, black and tan blending into shadow, but his steady amber gaze was unwavering. Rex growled softly whenever anyone passed too close to the garage door during the day, as though he recognized the value of the secret they guarded. Sleep eluded David again. He rose and walked into the garage, flashlight in hand. The hatch yawned open, the stone steps leading down like a throat into the earth. He descended slowly, the damp air enveloping him until he reached the vault. He moved down the rows of cars, his light brushing over polished metal, chrome gleaming like stars. He tried to picture the man Bernard Whitmore must have been. Perhaps Bernard had been tall, lean, his hands thick with calluses, from years of turning wrenches, his hair graying under the fluorescent lights as he worked long hours alone. Maybe he had been a man whose pride cost him connections, someone who poured love into machines because people had failed him. David could understand that. At the desk, he opened the ledger again. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was steady for most of the pages, neat, methodical, almost obsessive. Toward the end it trembled, letters uneven, lines crooked. David imagined Whitmore's health failing, his hand shaking as he scrawled the last line. Redemption. Protect it. The words felt like both command and confession. Back upstairs, dawn painted the windows with weak light. David's body ached with exhaustion. Ethan stirred on the cot, yawning, his hair sticking up wildly. The boy smiled sleepily. "Did you dream of the cars again, Dad?" he asked. David forced a smile. "Something like that." Later that morning, a knock at the door startled them. Their neighbor, Mrs. Langford, stood outside holding a small basket. She was a widow in her 70s, short and round, with silver hair pinned neatly back, her hands gnarled from arthritis but still gentle. Her face bore deep lines, but her pale blue eyes carried warmth. "Baked too much bread," she said softly, pressing the basket into David's hands. "You and the boy could use it more than me." She glanced at Ethan with a fond smile before shuffling away. David closed the door, setting the bread down. Acts like that reminded him how precarious his life had become. He had no choice but to decide soon, sell a car quietly, or find a way to honor Whitmore's charge. Both paths held peril. That evening, Ethan begged to sleep in the garage. "I want to be near it, Dad," he said, eyes wide. "It feels important." David hesitated, then agreed. He set up a small cot in the corner, close enough to the office where he could keep watch. Rex stretched out near the hatch as if he belonged there, sentinel and companion. In the silence of the night, David sat on a stool, staring at the keys on the table. His mind whirled with possibilities: illegal sales, museums, investors, secrecy, exposure. None felt safe. But then he looked at Ethan curled under a blanket, clutching his sketch of Rex as the museum's guardian, and he realized the boy saw no burden, only a gift. That clarity pierced David. Maybe it wasn't just wealth. Maybe it was legacy. For the first time since Sarah's death, David allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by debt or survival. A future where Ethan could be proud, where Rex would stand watch over something greater than their struggles, where Whitmore's work would live on. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. As dawn broke once more, David whispered to the still air, "All right, Bernard, I'll try." The decision was not final, not yet, but it was a step. Between survival and legacy, he was beginning to lean toward the latter. The decision weighed on David like armor he could not take off, but once it was made, there was no turning back. He could not sell the cars. He could not betray the trust Whitmore had left behind. Instead, he would try the unlikeliest path of all. He would share the secret, carefully, and hope others might see what he had seen. The idea terrified him. Trust in others meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was something the war and his losses had taught him to fear. Yet Ethan's drawings, his innocent belief that the garage could be more than just theirs, gnawed at David until it grew into conviction. He began with one man, Henry Calloway, a retired shop teacher who lived a few blocks from Milner Road. Henry was 72, round in the shoulders, with a barrel chest and hands still thick with strength, though his fingers bent slightly with arthritis. His white hair, cropped short, framed a face softened by years but sharpened by a pair of thick glasses that magnified his gray eyes. Known as a patient man who had taught half the boys in town how to use a wrench, Henry was also trusted, someone who loved machines not for money, but for the stories they carried. David invited him to the garage on a Saturday morning, the air crisp with the hint of autumn. Henry shuffled in wearing grease-stained overalls and old boots, his gait steady despite his age. "Heard you bought this old tomb," Henry muttered, peering around the main bay. "Most folks thought it'd collapse before anyone touched it again. What are you planning, Hale?" David hesitated, then led him to the hatch. With Rex at his side and Ethan watching wide-eyed, David unlocked it and guided Henry down the stone steps. When they reached the vault, Henry stopped dead. The beam of David's flashlight fell on the Mustang, the Ferrari, the Jaguar. Henry's mouth parted, his breath catching. Slowly, he pulled his glasses off, wiped them on a rag, and put them back on as though doubting his own sight. "Good Lord," he whispered, "do you know what you're sitting on?" David nodded grimly. "I know, but I don't know what to do." Henry's face shifted, awe giving way to determination. "You protect it. You share it. You don't let greed eat it alive." He walked to the cars, running a reverent hand along the polished hood, his voice lowered. This could bring the town back to life. The next week, David let Ethan invite a few friends from school. Teenagers with restless energy crowded into the garage, their eyes shining as they helped carry out broken shelves and painted walls. One boy named Kyle, tall and lanky with freckles and hair always falling into his eyes, couldn't stop grinning when David let him polish a chrome bumper. Another, Marcus, broader and quiet, moved with careful respect, his father having once been a mechanic before illness took him. Their laughter filled the hollow space, replacing the echo of dust with something alive. Word spread in, whispers first. A neighbor who saw lights on late into the night. A teenager who couldn't keep the secret from his older brother. Soon, a trickle of townsfolk began to wander by, peeking through the bay doors. Skepticism was thick. Some chuckled, muttering about veterans chasing ghosts. Others shook their heads, saying it was another doomed project. But the tide began to turn when David finally brought out photographs. Henry had insisted, "People won't believe without proof." One evening at the diner on Main Street, David laid the pictures down on a table. Glossy shots of the Mustang, the Ferrari, the Porsche gleaming under flashlight beams. The diner went silent. Conversations halted, forks froze midair. Old men who hadn't left their porches in years squinted hard, while younger folks leaned closer, their eyes wide with disbelief. "It can't be real," someone muttered, but the photos spoke louder than doubt. From that moment, curiosity became wildfire. Volunteers appeared at the garage each morning. Teenagers with spray cans painted over graffiti. Retired mechanics, gray-haired and stoop-shouldered, brought spare parts they had hoarded for years. One man named Earl, who had lost his wife and grown bitter, surprised everyone when he dragged in a box of carburetors, muttering, "Might as well be useful for something." A pair of local artists painted murals on the side walls, capturing silhouettes of cars in motion, wheels like wings. The most unexpected arrival came one Saturday when Sheriff Mullins himself pulled into the lot with his pickup. Mullins was a big man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with a weathered face framed by a thick mustache streaked with gray. Known for being gruff but fair, he carried the aura of a man who had seen both sides of law and compromise. Without a word, he stepped down and lowered the tailgate, revealing an antique gas pump, chipped red paint clinging to its frame. "Found this rotting in my barn," he said simply. "Figured it belonged here more than gathering dust." The gesture silenced the doubters. If the sheriff believed, maybe there was something real to believe in. Even Ethan became part of the movement. He led his school friends into the garage, pointing at the covered cars with pride. "One day this will be ours," he declared, his small voice carrying more certainty than his father's had in months. The children believed him. Their laughter, their sketches of imaginary exhibits, their dreams of a museum where Rex was the official mascot. These things spread faster than rumors. David stood in the middle of the garage one evening, coveralls smeared with primer and dust, watching the transformation unfold. Ladders leaned against walls. The smell of fresh paint cut through the old must of oil and rust, and laughter echoed where silence had once ruled. For the first time since Sarah's death, David felt something stronger than grief or survival. He felt purpose. The garage was no longer just his gamble. It was becoming the town's project, a living vision carried by many hands. The secret was no longer buried. It was shared, and in that sharing it began to grow. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and cool, the kind of autumn day when the air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. For months, the garage had been alive with hammering, scraping, painting, and polishing, and now it stood transformed. The sign above the newly repaired bay doors gleamed with fresh paint, bold letters spelling out Whitmore Heritage Garage. New glass windows reflected the bright sky, and strings of small lights framed the entrance, giving the building a glow that felt more like a beacon than a workshop. David stood near the doors in clean coveralls, the fabric stiff with starch, his boots polished though scuffed by years of wear. His hands, scarred and calloused, were clasped together behind his back, a soldier's stance betraying the nerves he could not quiet. Ethan stood beside him, his hoodie replaced for the day by a collared shirt tucked unevenly into his jeans, his hair combed down though strands refused to stay in place. Rex sat at their feet, tail brushing against the concrete, eyes alert and ears twitching at every sound from the growing crowd. The street in front of the garage swelled with people. Families with children, elderly couples, shopkeepers closing their stores for the morning. All had come, drawn by weeks of whispers and anticipation. David scanned the faces and recognized many. Henry Calloway in his oil-stained overalls, leaning proudly on a cane he rarely used. Mrs. Langford, small and round, holding a basket of bread wrapped in linen. Kyle and Marcus, teenagers, beaming with pride as though they had built the garage themselves. Earl, arms crossed, still gruff but unable to hide the spark in his eyes. And Sheriff Mullins, towering in his uniform, his thick mustache twitching as he tried to suppress a smile. A small stage had been set up with a microphone borrowed from the town hall. Denise Harper, the mayor's secretary, had insisted on helping organize the event despite her initial doubts. She was a tall woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones and auburn hair pinned back tightly, her dark eyes quick and skeptical. Though she had once dismissed David's claims as fantasy, now she stood off to the side of the stage with a clipboard, her posture firm, every detail under her watchful eye. When the clock struck noon, David stepped forward. The murmurs died into silence. He gripped the microphone, feeling its cold metal against his palm. For a moment, he faltered, the weight of every eye on him. Then he cleared his throat, his voice steady though low. "I used to think my life was about survival," he began. His gaze swept the crowd, his eyes lingering briefly on Ethan and Rex before moving on. "After the war, after losing my wife, I thought all I could do was get through each day, one after another, until something finally broke. I never thought I'd stand here, in front of all of you, with something worth sharing." The crowd listened in silence, breaths held as though waiting for the next word. "Sometimes the past feels like a weight we can't shake," David continued, his voice growing stronger. "But sometimes the past doesn't just give us burdens, it gives us second chances. Bernard Whitmore left something behind, not just for himself, but for us. And somehow, it found its way into my hands. I can't keep it hidden. It belongs to all of us." Ethan reached up and gripped his father's hand. The boy's smile was wide, his dark eyes shining with pride. Rex barked once, a deep sound that rippled through the air like a signal. David allowed himself the smallest smile, then gestured to the garage doors. The motors hummed, the heavy bay doors rolling upward. Light spilled inside, flooding the cavernous space. For a heartbeat, silence hung over the crowd as the first row of cars came into view. Gleaming Mustangs, the fiery Ferrari, the silver Porsche, the Shelby Cobra, all lined up under the new lights, polished to perfection. The gasp was collective. It rippled through the crowd like wind over grass, followed by an eruption of cheers, claps, and even tears. People surged forward, though orderly, drawn like pilgrims to a shrine. Some covered their mouths in awe. Others held up phones to capture what seemed impossible. Henry Calloway wiped at his eyes with the back of his thick fingers, muttering, "I never thought I'd live to see something like this." Mrs. Langford clutched her basket tightly, whispering a prayer of gratitude under her breath. Sheriff Mullins let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Even Denise, sharp-eyed and skeptical, lowered her clipboard, her lips curving into the faintest smile as she whispered to herself, "Well, I'll be damned." Children pointed eagerly, their voices shrill with wonder. "Look, it's like a movie car," one cried. Ethan darted ahead, tugging his friends by the arms, narrating proudly as though he had become the official tour guide. "That one's the Ferrari, and over there's the Mustang. One day this whole place will be ours to run." His words made the crowd laugh, but there was no mockery in it, only warmth. David lingered at the threshold, watching. He saw not just cars, but a mirror of what had been built in the past months. Trust, unity, hope. He thought of Sarah, tall and graceful, her long brown hair always tied back when she cooked, her pale skin glowing in the kitchen light as she reminded him to dream bigger for Ethan's sake. He imagined her standing there, smiling that soft smile that always steadied him. For the first time since her death, he felt she might truly be proud. He bent down as Ethan ran back, the boy flinging his arms around his father's waist. "We did it, Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice muffled against David's chest. "We really did it." David pulled in close, one hand resting on his son's back, the other brushing against Rex's fur as the dog barked joyfully, tail wagging like a banner. Above the noise, David lifted the microphone once more. "This isn't just my garage anymore," he said firmly. "It's ours, it's Dayton's, and it's proof that broken things, whether they're machines or people, can shine again." The cheers that followed were thunderous, and in that moment, David Hale, a veteran who had thought his story ended in loss, realized that he had built not just a museum, but a legacy. Sometimes, miracles don't come in the form of lightning from the sky or a burning bush in the desert. Sometimes they arrive quietly, hidden in dusty garages, in the wag of a loyal dog's tail, in the innocent drawings of a child who still believes in tomorrow. David thought he had lost everything: his wife, his peace, his sense of direction, but through an old mechanic's hidden legacy, he found more than classic cars. He found proof that God's grace often waits for us in the ordinary, reminding us that broken things, whether steel, hearts, or lives, can shine again when touched by faith and love. And perhaps, dear friend, in your own daily struggles, in unpaid bills, in lonely nights, in doubts about tomorrow, God may already be preparing a second chance, a quiet miracle waiting just beneath the floorboards of your life. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, resilience, and love. And may God bless you and your family, guiding you toward the hidden miracles that are closer than you think.